The silence in the hollow archive was a living thing, thick and heavy, pressing in on Lira and Kael from all sides. Moments before, the air had been torn apart by the shrieks of the remnant, a creature of shadow and forgotten sorrows. Now there was nothing. The dust motes dancing in the single beam of light seemed to hold their breath. The only sound was the frantic thumping of their own hearts, a wild drumbeat against the stillness. Kael leaned against a towering book-laden shelf, his knuckles white where he gripped the wood, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The fight had been a close thing, a desperate scramble in the dark, and the victory felt less like a triumph and more like a temporary reprieve from a much larger storm they couldn't yet see. Lira stood in the centre of the chamber, her gaze fixed on the object that had ended the battle. The first lantern. It wasn't grand or ornate, just a simple thing of aged bronze and clouded glass. But it pulsed with a soft, warm light that seemed to push back the ancient gloom of the archive. The light felt alive, ancient and knowing. It was this lantern that had driven the remnant back into the nothingness from which it came. As they watched, the light flickered, then split into two smaller, gentler flames. One drifted towards Lira, the other towards Kael, hovering before them like curious fireflies. It wasn't just an object, it was making a choice. It was choosing them. A strange warmth spread through Lira's chest as her flame drew closer, a feeling of belonging she hadn't felt since her village was lost to the blight. It was a comforting heat, like sitting by a hearth on a cold winter's night, but it was also heavy, filled with an unspoken promise and a sense of immense responsibility. Beside her, Kael reached out a hesitant hand towards his own flame, his expression a mixture of awe and deep-seated fear. He had spent his life running from the past, from the magic that had scarred his family. Now, here it was, offering him a partnership, a destiny he never asked for. The silence was no longer empty. It was filled with a question that hung in the air between them. The two flames finally settled, merging with their hands, not with a burn, but with a gentle, tingling sensation. The light of the first lantern brightened, casting their long, wavering shadows against the towering shelves of forgotten lore. They were no longer just two survivors hiding in a dusty ruin. The lantern had marked them, bound them to a fate far greater and more terrifying than they could have imagined. The quiet moment of their anointment was over. A new chapter, filled with unknown dangers and ancient magic, had just begun. And they were standing right on the first page, whether they were ready for it or not. The world outside the archive's dusty walls was about to change forever. The moment the flames settled, the world dissolved. Lira and Kael weren't in the hollow archive anymore. They were swept away, caught in a dizzying torrent of visions that poured directly from the lantern's ancient heart. It was a history lesson taught not with words, but with raw, unfiltered emotion and terrifying clarity. They saw cities of silver and gold crumble into dust, not from war, but from a creeping thorny blight that choked the life from stone and soil alike. They felt the despair of millions as the sky turned a sickly green and the sun grew cold. These weren't just stories, they were memories, the collected sorrows of a world that had faced this threat before and lost everything. Kael stumbled back, gasping, as a vision of a once lush forest turning into a petrified maze of thorns overwhelmed him. He felt the phantom pain of the land itself, the agony of life being twisted into a mockery of what it once was. Lira, meanwhile, witnessed the fall of the last great kingdom of the old world, Eldoria. She saw its brave knights, clad in shining armor, consumed by writhing, shadowy vines that erupted from the ground. She heard the final desperate cries of its people as their magnificent capital was dragged into the earth, leaving nothing but a barren crater. The lantern was showing them the price of failure, the devastating consequence of what they were now up against. Then the visions shifted from the past to the future. They saw their own world, the towns and villages they knew, facing the same creeping doom. They saw fields of wheat wither and turn black overnight. They saw rivers clog with thorny weeds, their water turning poisonous and foul. The faces of the people they saw were gaunt with fear and starvation, their hope dwindling with each passing day. A new darkness was coming, a relentless, patient enemy that didn't just conquer, but corrupted and consumed everything it touched. The lantern wasn't just a weapon, it was a warning bell, ringing to announce an apocalypse that was already in motion. The final vision was the most chilling of all. It showed a throne, not of gold or stone, but of woven living thorns, pulsating with a malevolent dark energy. Seated on this throne was a figure cloaked in shadows, its form vaguely humanoid but twisted and monstrous. Its presence radiated a cold, ancient power and an unending hunger. This was the source of the blight, the mind behind the destruction. The vision ended with the figure slowly raising its head, and for a terrifying second, Lira and Kael felt its gaze lock onto them across the gulf of time and possibility. The Thorn King was aware, and he was waiting. As the visions faded, leaving them breathless and trembling on the cold stone floor of the archive, a new presence filled their minds. It was a voice, gentle but firm, resonating with the wisdom of ages. It was the echo of Lira, the very first Flamekeeper, her consciousness bound to the lantern she had created. Her message was not one of comfort, but of stark reality. She explained that the lantern did not choose heroes or champions, it chose anchors. It chose those with the strength to bear the weight of hope when all hope seemed lost. To be a Flamekeeper was not a reward, but a sacred and incredibly heavy burden. The flame chooses not the strongest hand, but the steadiest heart. Lira's voice echoed in their thoughts, her words a soothing balm on their frayed nerves, yet sharp with warning. She told them that the lantern was one of 7, scattered across the lands after the last great war against the Thorn King. Each was a key and a weapon, holding a piece of the light needed to push back the encroaching darkness. But to carry it was to paint a target on your back. The shadows would hunt them, the creatures of the blight would be drawn to the lantern's light, and the Thorn King himself would focus his undying malice upon them. Lira's warning was clear. The path of a Flamekeeper was one of solitude and sacrifice. "You will be hunted," she warned, her voice laced with the memory of her own long-forgotten struggles. "You will be tested. Your fears will be used against you, and your hope will be the first thing the darkness seeks to extinguish. Many have carried this light before you, and many have fallen. The flame is a beacon for all that is good, but it is also a torch that illuminates you for all that is evil." Her words were not meant to scare them, but to prepare them for the crushing responsibility that now rested squarely on their shoulders. The message ended with a final solemn instruction. They were not alone, but they were scattered. They had to find the others. "Seek the other Flamekeepers," Lira urged. "For one flame can light a candle, but 7 flames can start a fire that will burn away the shadows of the world. The path is dangerous, and your journey starts now. Do not let the flame die." Her voice faded, leaving behind an echoing silence that was now filled not with fear, but with the immense weight of their new purpose. The choice was no longer just about their own survival, it was about the survival of everyone. Deep within the blighted heart of the withered lands, in a subterranean cavern where no light had shone for 1,000 years, something stirred. A sarcophagus of petrified wood, bound by roots as thick as a man's waist, began to crack. A faint, dark energy, the very antithesis of the lantern's warm glow, pulsed from within, growing stronger with each passing moment. The awakening of the first lantern had acted like an alarm clock, rousing this ancient evil from its long forced slumber. The bonds of old magic that had held it prisoner for centuries were weakening, undone by the resurgence of the very power that had defeated it. The Thorn King was not a man, not anymore. He was a force of nature, a being of endless patience and insatiable hunger, who believed that life was a flaw, a chaotic mess that needed to be corrected. His form of correction was the blight, a creeping corruption that didn't just kill, but remade everything in its own thorny, silent image. His power grew from despair and decay, and with every patch of forest that withered, with every field that failed, his strength returned. He was the king of stillness, the ruler of a silent grey kingdom, where nothing grew, nothing changed, and nothing felt. His return was the ultimate threat because he represented the end of everything. Not a fiery apocalypse or a swift, merciful end, but a slow, grinding decline into nothingness. Where he ruled, there was no art, no music, no laughter, only the rustle of thorny vines and the silence of a world petrified. He was an enemy that could not be reasoned with, a plague that could not be cured, only fought. The ancient kings and heroes had managed to seal him away, but they had not been able to destroy him. They had merely paused his conquest, and now the pause was over. The Thorn King was waking up, and he was very, very hungry. As Lira and Kael processed Liwena's warning, they could almost feel his malevolent consciousness reaching out across the land. It was a cold, cloying presence at the edge of their minds, a whisper of absolute despair. The danger was no longer an abstract concept from a vision. It was real, it was waking, and it was aware of the light they now carried. The war had not just begun, it had been reignited. The first move had been made when they picked up the lantern, and now in the deepest, darkest part of the world, the opposing king was rising from his throne to make his own move on the board. The weight of their new reality crashed down on Lira and Kael. The hollow archive, once a shelter, now felt like a cage. Kael paced the floor, his mind racing. "We should run," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "We hide the lantern, go somewhere the blight will never find us. We're not soldiers, Lira, we're just us." The thought was tempting. They could disappear, live out their lives in some forgotten corner of the world and let someone else deal with the Thorn King. It was the sensible choice. The choice that might let them live to see another sunrise. To stay, to fight, seemed like a fool's errand, a suicide mission handed to them by a ghost. Lira, however, stood firm, the lantern's light casting a determined glow on her face. "And what then, Kael?" she asked, her voice steady. "We hide while the world withers and dies around us. We listen to the silence as everyone we could have saved is consumed. My village is gone, your family. They were taken by a darkness like this. Running is what we've always done. Look where it's gotten us. Liwena said the lantern chose us for our steady hearts. It's time we proved her right." She remembered the faces in her vision, the despair and the fear, and knew she could not turn her back on them. It wasn't about being a soldier, it was about being human. Just as their debate reached its peak, the lantern flared, pulling them into one final shared vision. It was a glimpse of the future that would come to pass if they chose to run. They saw themselves older, huddled in a cave on a desolate mountaintop, the last patch of green in a world entirely consumed by a grey, thorny forest. The sky was permanently overcast, and the silence was absolute. There was no one else left. They were the last two people alive, surrounded by the world they had abandoned, their survival a meaningless, hollow victory. The vision was a stark look at the cost of their own safety, a future built on the graves of everyone else. That single horrifying image shattered any remaining doubt. As they came back to themselves, the choice was clear. It was terrifying, yes, but it was the only one they could live with. "You're right," Kael said, his voice no longer hesitant but filled with a new, steely resolve. He met Lira's gaze, a silent understanding passing between them. They were in this together. United by the flame and their shared vision, they turned towards the entrance of the archive. Their quest began now. They would find the other Flamekeepers. They would fight. As they stepped out into the dawn of a new day, they were filled not with fear, but with a fierce, burning hope, ready to face the long, dark road ahead.